Trump just won the election.
Donald Trump clinching an historic victory.
And well, besides the hundreds of questions on everyone's mind, the most important one is, how will this affect my bag? After all, every administration has its own legacy and impact on overall wealth, and this one might be the most tricky. And videos of conflicts around the world the US is involved in, and also homelessness on the streets in LA as a speed run.
Donald Trump will be the 47th president of the United States.
Price of Bitcoin has surged to an all-time high since Donald Trump's election, on the back of his promises to make the US the crypto capital of the planet.
On November 5th, 2024, Donald Trump made history by winning the presidential election. His victory wasn't just another notch in his political belt. It actually marked a major shift in the electoral landscape, flipping key battleground states that had previously leaned the other way, making Trump the first former president since Grover Cleveland to serve non-consecutive terms. History books aside, his election affects everyone, regardless of what side you stand and who you voted for. Trump calls the shot now, and well, we all have to listen. So before we dive into how he just might make or break an already fragile financial system, let's first look at it and see just how dire the situation is. As Donald Trump kicks off his second term in 2025, the US economy finds itself in a pretty interesting spot, steady in some areas, but with plenty of hurdles ahead. See, by the end of 2024, things weren't looking too shabby. The unemployment rate was holding at around 3.9%, which is solid, especially considering how rough the job market got after the pandemic. Inflation, that nasty little monster we were all sick of hearing about, had finally calmed down. It dropped from a scary 7% in 2022 to a much more chill 2.1%, which is right where the Federal Reserve wants it. Yeah, it's not the doom and gloom we were dealing with just a couple of years ago. With that said, the bigger picture is a little less exciting. The economy is still growing, but not quite as fast as it was. The GDP is expected to grow by about 2.5% this year, which is slower than the 3.1% we saw in 2023. It's not bad, but it's definitely not booming. This might seem impressive for an administration some people claim was led by an old man without a plan, but when you compare it to Trump's first term, you can see just how far things had fallen. In his first term, unemployment was at a record low of 3.5% in early 2020, way down from the 5% he inherited. But then the pandemic hit, and everything went sideways. For example, inflation back then was barely a blip on anyone's radar, sitting at a nice, predictable 2%. Fast forward to the years that followed, and inflation spiraled out of control, forcing the Federal Reserve to take action by raising interest rates. Those were undoubtedly stressful times, and the worst part was that this matter affected everyone. For some time now, the Federal Reserve has been signaling the possibility of lowering interest rates, which could be very problematic if you're planning to buy a house, start a business, or even just pay off loans. At the moment, prices are stabilizing, so you're not actually paying as much for groceries and gas as you were a year or two ago, but there's still an even bigger problem: the federal debt. At the moment, the federal government owes an alarming $1.9 trillion, and the national debt is nearly as large as the entire economy altogether. Now, this is a serious concern that cannot be ignored, because it means the government is borrowing at an unsustainable rate, which could lead to higher interest payments, reduced financial flexibility, and even potential instability in the economy down the line. Essentially, the more the government borrows, the harder it becomes to manage future budgets without making tough choices, like cutting programs or raising taxes, both of which can negatively impact our daily lives. So here we are. Trump is back in office, and while he has the opportunity to revive some of his previous economic policies, it's clear that it won't be easy. Sure, the economy is in better shape than it was during the chaos of the pandemic, but there is still a lot of work ahead, and the question remains, what is he going to do? Let's talk about it, starting with what affects us the most on this channel. The impact of Donald Trump's presidency on wealth generation and employment levels is both very important and insanely complex. Shaped by his economic policies and the global events that unfolded during his time in office, we kind of know what to expect. See, One of the most notable aspects of Trump's economic agenda was the passage of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, TCJA, in 2017. This reform significantly lowered the corporate tax rate, aiming to stimulate investment and business expansion by increasing after-tax profits. The idea was that corporations would reinvest these savings into their businesses, creating jobs and boosting the economy. And well, it worked. The result was a surge in stock buybacks, which helped lift stock market performance during Trump's presidency. In fact, the S&P 500, for example, saw a remarkable increase of 69.6% during his tenure, benefiting wealthy investors and those with significant stock holdings. In addition to tax cuts, Trump's administration focused on deregulation, particularly in industries like energy and finance. By rolling back regulations, the administration aimed to reduce costs for businesses, which, in theory, could increase profitability and encourage investment. And well, this worked too, as the approach was seen as beneficial for business owners and entrepreneurs, particularly in sectors that were heavily regulated before. And then, on the employment front, Trump presided over a period of strong job growth, with the unemployment rate reaching historic lows prior to the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, while the pandemic led to widespread job losses, it's important to point out that the economy had seen steady job creation in the years before, with around 6.7 million jobs added when excluding pandemic-related disruptions. Now, it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows, because Trump's trade policies, such as the imposition of tariffs, did not have the desired effects on job creation in manufacturing. In fact, studies showed that these tariffs likely led to job losses in other sectors, resulting in a net loss of jobs. Ultimately, while some workers benefited from lower taxes and deregulation, the broader effects of his policies on employment were mixed. So what can we expect now? Well, Trump's anticipated economic policies appear to prioritize tax cuts and deregulation, which could create an environment conducive to wealth accumulation for certain groups. Key word here being certain groups. As it stands, it seems his tax plan includes cuts that would primarily benefit high-income individuals and corporations, resulting in significant tax savings for the wealthiest Americans. However, the lower and middle-income groups may face tax increases, offsetting some potential gains we could have gotten in the first place. Essentially, the rich will get richer, and the rest, well, they have to look for jobs. But that isn't the full picture, because extended corporate tax cuts and measures to reduce regulations could also lead to increased investments in specific sectors, potentially boosting stock prices and personal wealth for investors. So at the moment, it kind of depends on how you position yourself and what industry you are in. After all, studies are showing that the economic environment under Trump's leadership may favor growth-oriented businesses, particularly in energy, manufacturing, and finance, allowing those involved in these sectors to capitalize on favorable conditions. In terms of employment, Trump's policies are expected to produce varied outcomes across different demographics. As we mentioned during his previous administration, the unemployment rate reached historic lows, especially among minority groups, and job growth was strong. However, his proposals for mass deportation of immigrants could have negative repercussions on the labor market, particularly in sectors reliant on immigrant labor. For one, employment forecasts suggest that while certain industries may thrive under his policy changes, others could face challenges due to increased tariffs and protectionist measures, which might lead to job losses in manufacturing and agriculture. Which, to be honest, is scary, because we need more people in this sector. As it stands, the proposed tariffs, especially if not accompanied by effective domestic production incentives, could raise costs for consumers and businesses, potentially dampening overall job growth. So basically, it can go one of two ways: insane profits or a serious reduction in job availability. Two sectors that seem to be thriving since his re-election, however, are the stock market and cryptocurrency.
Cryptocurrencies are a whole different matter. Crypto is celebrating Trump's victory. Bitcoin, the world's best-known cryptocurrency, rose to a record high today. It breached the $75,000 mark.
See, the stock market response to Trump's re-election has been overwhelmingly positive, and this is mainly due to an increase in investor confidence across the board. Historically, stocks tend to perform well under a Republican administration, often attributed to pro-business policies. And as we mentioned, Trump's approach typically favors growth-oriented sectors, and as such, the expected push for tax cuts may lead to substantial gains in key indexes like the S&P 500. In fact, analysts estimate that if his tax proposals are implemented, they could potentially increase S&P 500 earnings by around 4%. And we are already seeing signs of this, because on the day after the election itself, the S&P 500 skyrocketed. It got to the point that even recent trends suggest that small-cap stocks, which typically benefit from domestic economic growth, may outperform large-cap competitors as investors anticipate a renewed focus on American manufacturing and energy production. And if you think the stock market is looking good, then you need to pull out your chart and look at what is going on in cryptocurrency. Trump's return is likely to be very favorable for cryptocurrency markets, building on his previous support for digital assets. In fact, following his election win, Bitcoin prices soared to record highs, reaching a mind-numbing $99,000. To make matters better, Trump has also pledged to create a federal stockpile of Bitcoin and dismantle regulatory barriers, especially those established during the Biden administration. And we are already seeing that in action with his suggestion to fire SEC Chair Gary Gensler, who has been tough on cryptocurrency regulations.
If crypto is going to define the future, I want to be mined, minted, and made in the USA. It's going to be. It's not going to be made anywhere else. And if Bitcoin is going to the moon, as we say, it's going to the moon, I want America to be the nation that leads the way. And that's what's going to happen. On day one, I will fire Gary Gensler and appoint a new SEC chairman.
Under Trump, the rules around cryptocurrencies might change, and it seems like this might be as good a time to start to focus on this sector. To make things more exciting, the promise of a more crypto-friendly administration has excited investors, prompting not just price surges, but also speculation about further institutional adoption and investment